The day my ex-husband married the woman he cheated on me with, I told myself I would sit through the vows, smile once, and leave with whatever dignity he had not already taken from me. I had no idea that before the rings were exchanged, a widow in black lace would walk down the aisle, carrying a sealed cream envelope, and ask one question that turned the entire wedding into a crime scene. "Before you marry him," she said, looking straight at the bride, "ask him whose name really built this empire." By the time the music stopped, the bride was crying, investors were making calls, and the man who had spent years calling himself self-made was begging people not to open that envelope. My name is Kemi Adesina, and this is the night everything finally caught up with Femi Afolayan. 3 years earlier, I was still married to Femi. If you met him back then, you would have understood why so many people admired him. He had the kind of confidence that made rooms adjust around him. He was not the loudest man in the room, but somehow he always became the center of it. He spoke carefully, dressed sharply, and knew exactly how to make ambition sound noble. When we first married, I believed I was building a future with a man who was driven, disciplined, and destined for something bigger than ordinary life. And in the beginning, maybe that was true. We did not start in luxury. We started in a cramped apartment in Surulere with unreliable power, one aging car, and a refrigerator that hummed louder than the ceiling fan. I was teaching literature at a private school. Femi was building a logistics and procurement company with his closest friend, Kojo Badu. If Femi was the face of the dream, Kojo was the mind behind it. Kojo was quieter, less polished, and never as hungry for applause, but he was brilliant. He understood numbers the way some people understand music. He could look at a broken business model and see exactly where the leaks were. He could negotiate without raising his voice. He and Femi balanced each other well, or at least that was what I believed then. We used to have dinners on plastic chairs in our tiny sitting room while they argued about strategy and expansion. Femi would talk about scale, influence, and reputation. Kojo would bring the conversation back to contracts, margins, and risk. I remember thinking that if they stayed together, they would build something powerful. Then success arrived faster than any of us expected. Their company landed a major distribution contract, supplying materials to a chain of regional construction firms. That one deal opened doors to bigger contracts, better clients, and rooms where powerful men stopped seeing Femi and Kojo as small operators. Money began to move. Investors started calling. Their names started appearing in business blogs and industry panels. The future no longer looked far away. It looked close enough to touch. That was when everything started changing. At first it was subtle. Femi became busier, sharper, more impatient. He started talking less like a partner and more like a man who expected obedience. He had new suits before we could comfortably afford them. He stopped asking my opinion and started informing me of decisions after he had already made them. If I raised concerns, he would smile and say, "I was thinking too small." Kojo noticed it too. One evening after a dinner meeting, when Femi had gone back inside the restaurant to take a call, Kojo stood beside me in the parking lot and said something that unsettled me. "Success doesn't change a man," he said quietly. "It reveals which version of him was waiting all along." I laughed back then, because I did not know what else to do. I thought he was being dramatic. I would think about those words for years. A few months later, Kojo was involved in a serious car accident on his way back from a late client meeting near Ibadan. The story was that a truck lost control in the rain and sent 2 vehicles off the road. Kojo survived the crash, but barely. He was taken to a private hospital in Lagos in critical condition. For 2 days, the entire company seemed to stop breathing. I remember Femi at the hospital, moving from doctor to doctor, answering calls, updating staff, performing concerns so convincingly that nobody would have dared question it. Abena Kusi, Kojo's wife, sat outside intensive care with swollen eyes and a scarf tied too tightly around her head. She looked like someone trying not to fall apart in public. Kojo died on the third morning. I still remember the sound Abena made when the doctor told her. It was not loud. That was what made it worse. It was the sound of a person breaking inward. After the funeral, everyone said the same thing. Poor Kojo. What a tragedy. Life is unfair. At least his family will be taken care of. That last part turned out to be a lie. Within weeks, Femi announced that Kojo had signed an emergency transfer of his shares while he was in the hospital. According to Femi, Kojo had known he might not survive and wanted the company to remain stable. Femi said he would look after Abena and the child and carry the business forward in Kojo's honor. People praised him for his strength. I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him, but something about the timing made my stomach turn. The documents surfaced too neatly. The explanation came too fast. Abena looked too stunned when she heard it. And when I asked Femi why Kojo would transfer away such a large stake instead of simply naming a temporary custodian, he went cold. "You don't understand how business works," he told me. Maybe I didn't. But I understood grief, and Abena did not look like a woman who had been included in a loving final decision. Still, life kept moving. Femi gained full control of the company. New investors came in, bigger deals followed. Our apartment became a house. The old car became 2 imported vehicles. The man who once counted fuel money started discussing waterfront property and expansion into Ghana. Everywhere we went, people called him visionary. And somewhere in the middle of all that admiration, he changed completely. He grew secretive first, then dismissive, then cruel in ways that left no bruises and therefore no evidence. His phone was always face down. His meetings kept getting later. His patience with me vanished. If I asked where he had been, I was insecure. If I asked why Abena still seemed financially strained, I was emotional. If I asked why Kojo's name was barely mentioned in the company's success story anymore, I was trying to sabotage his peace. Then I found Soraya Mensah. At first, she appeared the way these women often do, through tagged photos, gala events, and comments that were too familiar to be innocent. Soraya was beautiful, glamorous, and always exactly where Femi seemed to be. Then came the hotel receipt I was never supposed to see. Then the late-night message that lit up his screen while he was in the shower. Then the lies layered so thickly on top of each other that there was nothing left to misunderstand. When I confronted him, he did not deny it for long. He looked tired, almost annoyed, as if my pain had become another administrative inconvenience in his life. "This marriage ended a long time ago," he said. "You just didn't notice." That sentence did something to me. Not because it was true, but because of how easily he said it. Like the years we had built together were a draft he had decided not to keep. Within months, he filed for divorce. And because powerful men understand narrative better than guilt, he made sure people heard his version first. Suddenly, I was the bitter ex-wife who could not handle his growth. He was the successful man who had outgrown a small marriage. Soraya became the elegant new chapter. I became the woman left behind. I rebuilt quietly. I changed schools. I downsized. I learned how to smile in rooms where I knew people had heard stories about me. I learned how to survive being erased while still breathing. Then one afternoon, an invitation arrived. Cream paper, gold embossing. Lekki waterfront venue. Femi Afolayan and Soraya Mensah request the honor of your presence. I stared at it for a long time. At first, I wanted to burn it. Then I wanted to laugh. Then, underneath the humiliation, another feeling appeared. Defiance. I was tired of moving my life around the ruins he had made. Tired of hiding from events just because he might be in them. Tired of allowing his choices to dictate where I could stand, what I could endure, and how visible I was allowed to be. So I decided to go. Not because I wished them well. Not because I wanted closure packaged in flowers and violin music. I went because I needed proof that he no longer had the power to make me disappear. The wedding was obscene in the way only people trying to prove something can be obscene. The venue overlooked the water. Gold lanterns lined the entrance. White orchids hung from polished beams. A live string quartet played arrangements of love songs most marriages never deserve. Women stepped out of black SUVs in designer asoebi, and men in tailored agbaras spoke in the low, confident tones of people accustomed to getting away with things. I wore a deep emerald dress and the calmest face I could manage. Inside, Femi looked exactly like the man he had always wanted to become. White and gold attire, expensive watch, smile sharpened by victory. Soraya glittered beside him like a trophy that had learned how to breathe. For the first hour, I stayed near the back and said very little. I observed. I survived. Then I noticed her. She was seated alone near the side aisle, dressed entirely in black lace despite the sea of celebration around her. Not mourning black exactly, deliberate black, controlled black. The kind worn by someone who has come not to blend in, but to remember why she is there. It took me a second to recognize her. Abena, Kojo's widow. 3 years had changed her. Grief had refined her face into something harder, quieter, almost ceremonial. Resting on her lap was a sealed cream envelope. When our eyes met, she gave the smallest nod. A chill passed through me. I might have gone to her immediately, but just then the ceremony shifted into the reception phase, and Femi rose to give a speech. The room softened into silence around him. He thanked investors. He thanked mentors. He thanked destiny. He thanked Soraya for believing in the man behind the empire. Then he smiled the smile I had once mistaken for sincerity and said, "Everything I have today was built with my own hands, my own risk, and my own vision." That was the moment Abena stood up. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with a finality that made me stop breathing. She did not interrupt him immediately. She waited until the applause began, then walked toward me instead. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was calm, and that frightened me more than anger would have. We stepped into a side corridor near the bridal suite where the music faded into soft echo. Abena held out the envelope. "I was going to give this straight to her," she said, meaning Soraya. "But before I do, I need someone who knew him before all this to hear me and tell me if I'm losing my mind." I said nothing. I could barely think. She opened the envelope. Inside were copies of company filings, hospital timestamps, legal correspondence, and one printed photograph of Kojo lying unconscious in a hospital bed. On top was a share transfer document bearing Kojo's signature, dated the day before he died. "At first," Abena said, "I thought grief was confusing me. I thought maybe I was just a widow searching for someone to blame. But I kept coming back to one detail: the time. She handed me another page. It was a hospital record showing Kojo had been sedated and intubated during the exact window when the signature on the transfer was supposedly witnessed. I looked at her, then back at the page, then back at her again. He couldn't have signed this, I whispered. Abina's jaw tightened. No, he could not. The world around me seemed to tilt. She kept going. Months earlier, while trying to refinance a small property and clear old legal questions for her son's inheritance, she had reopened the company filings. That was when she found inconsistencies in the original transfer and a second document she had never seen before. A backdated founder resolution removing restrictions on internal share acquisition during medical incapacity. In plain language, someone had changed the rules after Kojo could no longer speak. I felt sick. Then she showed me the worst part. A sworn statement from the company's former secretary, Mrs. Ireti da Silva. In it, Ireti said Femi had pressured her to process documents after Kojo's death, telling her the paperwork reflected the founder's verbal wishes. When she hesitated, he promised her protection. When she questioned the dates, he told her to align the record with business continuity. Months later, she resigned. Abina looked at me carefully. Ireti is old now. She doesn't want public drama. But she signed this in front of a lawyer 2 months ago. I could hear the wedding music swelling again in the main hall. Laughter, glasses, celebration. It sounded obscene. Why tonight? I asked. Abina's eyes shifted toward the ballroom doors. Because he's about to secure a new foreign investment round next week using assets he would not control if Kojo's shares were still where they belonged. Because once that deal closes, untangling this becomes 10 times harder. And because men like Femi survive by keeping every confrontation private. She paused. I want this one public. At that moment, I still thought the envelope was the whole story. I was wrong. Abina reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. There's one more thing, she said. Kojo left a voice note for our son's 5th birthday. He recorded it months before the accident. It was supposed to be private, just family. But listen to what he says halfway through. She played the audio. Kojo's voice, warm and tired, filled the small corridor. He spoke to his son about kindness, patience, and choosing truth over pride. Then, almost casually, he said, "If anything ever happens to me, your mother must keep my shares safe for you. Nobody should take what was built for your future." I closed my eyes. For a second, I could not hear anything except the blood pounding in my ears. He knew, I said. Abina nodded once. Maybe not what would happen, but he knew enough not to trust blind loyalty. I asked if anyone else had seen this. Yes, she said. A lawyer. And one investor's compliance advisor who told me exactly what I expected. If I bring it privately, it disappears. If I bring it publicly, people are forced to choose. She looked toward the ballroom. Tonight, they choose. When we walked back inside, the reception had grown louder. Soraya was laughing at something one of the bridesmaids had said. Femi was surrounded by business associates, all of them leaning toward him the way men lean toward power when they think it might become contagious. Abina did not head for the stage. She walked straight to Soraya. At first, the bride smiled politely, assuming this was another guest bringing blessings. Abina held out the envelope. "Before you marry him," she said clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "you need to read what is inside." Soraya's smile faltered. "I'm sorry?" Femi turned at the sound of Abina's voice, and I watched recognition hit his face like a blade. For the first time that entire night, he looked afraid. "Abina," he said too quickly, stepping forward. "This is not the time." "No," she replied. "The time was 3 years ago." Conversations nearby began to quiet. One table, then another. Soraya looked from Abina to Femi. "What is this?" Femi tried to laugh. It came out brittle. "An unfortunate misunderstanding from a grieving woman." Abina did not even glance at him. "Then let her read it." He reached for the envelope. She pulled it back. That small movement changed the room. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Soraya hesitated, then took the envelope with unsteady fingers. She pulled out the first document. Her eyes moved quickly, then slower, then stopped. "What is this?" she asked. Femi stepped closer. "Soraya, give that to me." She did not. She kept reading. Abina spoke with terrifying calm. "It is the share transfer your husband claims made him sole controller of the company that funded this wedding. It is also impossible." Femi's face hardened. "You need to leave." But now too many people were listening. Abina lifted the hospital record and held it beside the transfer copy. "My husband was sedated and on assisted breathing support during the exact hour this signature was supposedly witnessed. He did not sign away his future. He did not sign away his son's inheritance. And yet somehow, after his death, Femi Afolayan became the sole hero of a company built by 2 men." The silence that followed felt physical. One of Femi's investors took a step closer. Soraya turned another page. Her lips parted. "Femi." He reached again. "You are being manipulated." "Am I?" she whispered. She had found the sworn statement. I could see the exact moment his control over the room began to slip. People started asking questions all at once. What document? Which shares? What does the hospital record mean? Who is this woman? Who signed what? Why is there a statement from a company secretary? Femi raised his voice, trying to recover ground. He said the papers were incomplete. Then he said legal matters were being misrepresented. Then he claimed Abina had waited too long for any of this to be credible. Then he called it extortion. Every sentence made him look guiltier. Soraya turned to him slowly. "Did he sign this in hospital?" He stared at her. That was his mistake. If he had lied quickly, maybe some people would have clung to the lie out of convenience. But silence, in moments like that, is a confession wearing expensive clothes. "Femi," she said again, louder this time. "Did he sign this in hospital?" An older man from one of the investor groups asked to see the papers. Abina handed them over without hesitation. Another guest lifted the sworn statement and read faster than politeness allowed. A woman near the front covered her mouth with both hands, and then Soraya found the printed transcript of Kojo's voice note. Her face changed completely. "What is this?" she asked. Abina answered for her. "The man whose name your husband erased. The man who said those shares were for his son." Femi looked around the room and realized too late that no one was protecting him anymore. Not really. They were protecting themselves from him. "This is a family issue," he snapped. "Everyone needs to stop turning this into theater." Abina's composure finally sharpened into anger. "Theater," she said. You buried my husband's name, took what belonged to his child, and built a public image on forged timing and private fear. If this is theater, then you wrote it." Somebody near the back started recording. That opened the floodgates. Phones appeared everywhere. One of the investors demanded to know whether this was the same ownership structure used in current financing presentations. Another asked if Kojo's estate had ever signed off on dilution rounds. A third asked for the name of the law firm that processed the transfer. Femi kept changing his answers. It had been an emergency decision. Kojo had verbally agreed. The documents were standard. Abina was bitter. The secretary was confused. The hospital timing was irrelevant. The company had been saved. He sounded less like a founder and more like a man frantically searching for whichever lie might survive the next 30 seconds. Soraya took 2 slow steps away from him. "Did you know this was false?" she asked, her voice trembling. "When you told me you built everything yourself, did you know?" He reached for her hand. She pulled it back before he could touch her. I will never forget his expression then. Not sorrow, not shame. Calculation collapsing into panic. Because until that moment, he still believed he could contain the damage emotionally, calm the bride, quiet the widow, embarrass the ex-wife, smooth the investors. But once Soraya moved away from him publicly, the story changed. He was no longer a successful groom facing a bitter interruption. He was a possibly fraudulent man losing witnesses in real time. An attorney who had attended as a guest requested the documents be photographed immediately. One of the investors called his compliance team on speaker. Another demanded copies of the hospital records and Iretti's statement. Abina agreed to all of it. Femi tried to order security to remove her. Security did not move. Neither did anybody else. Because now the room understood something simple. If they forced the widow out without reviewing the evidence, they became part of the cover-up. Soraya looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, like it had turned into something dirty. Then she removed it, slowly, publicly, without a word. A sound moved through the room. Not quite a gasp, more like disbelief catching in 100 throats at once. Femi stared at her hand, as if he did not understand what he was seeing. "You're really doing this here?" he asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "No," she said. "You did this here." Those were the words that broke whatever was left of the wedding. The event coordinator rushed in and then froze, clearly realizing nothing in her training manual covered luxury collapse mixed with corporate fraud. Family members split into instant factions, those trying to defend him, those backing away from him, and those pretending they had never fully trusted him in the first place. Men who had been praising him an hour earlier were suddenly very interested in distance, tone, and legal phrasing. Abina stood still through all of it. I stood a few feet away and watched a lie lose oxygen. Eventually, the investors and legal minds in the room agreed to move the matter into one of the venue's private conference suites. Femi objected. Nobody cared. The documents went with Abina. The people whose money mattered went with the documents. Femi followed because he had no choice. Soraya did not go with him. She sank into a chair near the stage, still in her wedding gown, staring at the opened envelope in her lap like it contained the ashes of her future. For a second, I considered going to her. Then I didn't. Some grief arrives as punishment. Some arrives as revelation. She would have to learn the difference on her own. I stayed long enough to hear one more devastating detail emerge behind the conference room doors. The current expansion round, Femi's biggest deal yet, had used ownership percentages that assumed Kojo's stake had been lawfully extinguished. If Abina's documents were valid, the deal was contaminated from the foundation upward. Not just morally, legally. That was when I knew the night would not end quietly. By morning, the wedding had become rumor, then evidence, then a whispered scandal moving through legal offices and investor chats. By afternoon, it was a crisis. Compliance teams were reviewing archived filings. Calls were being made to the Corporate Affairs Commission. Old board records were being requested. People who had once been too afraid to question timelines were suddenly very brave once powerful men began asking the same questions. And the most dangerous thing for Femi was this. Too many people had now seen too much. The lie could no longer survive by staying elegant. Over the next few weeks, the empire he had worshipped began to crack at the joints. One lender paused negotiations. A second requested indemnity reviews. A third withdrew entirely. The foreign investors delayed closing. Journalists started calling. Former staff members, sensing that the wall around him had weakened, began speaking more openly about rushed paperwork, missing founder approvals, and decisions that had always felt strange, but impossible to challenge while Femi was untouchable. Mrs. Iretti's statement was formally submitted through counsel. Abena filed to reopen estate-linked ownership claims on behalf of her son. And then another bomb surfaced. Kojo had sent an email draft to himself 2 weeks before the accident, detailing tension with Femi over dilution pressure, and documenting his refusal to surrender majority protections without family safeguards. He never sent it to anyone else, but it was time-stamped, recoverable, and devastating. The more facts surfaced, the smaller Femi's version of reality became. As for Soraya, she disappeared from public view almost immediately. Some said she moved out that same night. Others said she never even went to the post-wedding apartment that had been prepared for them. I do not know what he told her in private, or how much she had known before that night, or whether she had simply fallen in love with a performance so polished that she never thought to check who paid for the stage. But I know this. Whatever fantasy they built could not survive direct contact with truth. And me? For a long time, I thought that if Femi were ever exposed, I would feel joy so sharp it would heal everything he had broken. I imagined triumph, vindication, revenge. What I felt instead was relief. Not because he suffered, because I no longer had to carry the insult of his story. For years, he had moved through the world as the brilliant, self-made man, while I had lived under the shadow of being the wife he outgrew. He had upgraded publicly. I had grieved privately. He had worn tailored success, while I wore silence. But once the truth surfaced, I did not need the room to apologize to me. Reality had apologized on its own. Weeks later, I saw Abena for coffee. She looked tired, but lighter. Not happy, some losses never become happy, but steadier. She told me the legal process would be long. There would be delays, denials, and men in expensive offices pretending confusion. But for the first time since Kojo died, she felt like his son might one day inherit truth instead of just a story about it. Before we left, she said something I still think about. Men like Femi believe theft is only about money, she said. They never understand that what they really steal first is memory. They steal who built what, who deserved what, who was there before the lights came on. She was right. Femi did not just steal shares if the claims proved true. He stole authorship. He stole the right to history. He stole a dead man's place in the story and wore it like a custom suit. But stories, like debts, have a way of returning. Months later, I walked alone by the water near my new apartment and thought about how much of my old life had collapsed before I understood what was being saved. Femi had taken years from me. He had humiliated me. He had tried to make me feel replaceable, forgettable, and small. But there was one thing he never managed to take: my ability to rebuild without lying. That belonged to me, not to his betrayal, not to Soraya, not to the wedding, not to the empire he built by standing where someone else should have stood. And that is why the night of his collapse mattered. Not because he finally lost, because I finally stopped carrying him. He had spent years trying to become the only name people remembered. But in the end, it was one widow, one envelope, and one buried truth that brought the entire performance down. And sometimes that is justice. Not thunder, not revenge, just the right document opened in the right room at the exact moment a lie runs out of places to hide.